What the world of spirits is, section 421. The world of spirits is neither heaven nor hell, but a place or state between the two. It is where we first arrive after death, being in due time either raised into heaven or cast into hell from it, depending on our life in this world. Section 422. The world of spirits is a place halfway between heaven and hell, and it is also our own halfway state after death. I have been shown that it is a halfway place by seeing that the hells were underneath it and the heavens above it, and that it is a halfway state by learning that as long as we are in it, we are not yet in either heaven or hell. A state of heaven for us is the union of what is good and true within us, and a state of hell is a union of what is evil and false within us. When the good in a spirit person is united to the true, then that individual arrives in heaven, because, as already stated, that union is heaven within us. On the other hand, when the evil is united to the false within us, then we arrive in hell, because that union is hell within us. The process of union takes place in the world of spirits, because then we are in a halfway state. It amounts to the same thing, whether you say the union of intellect and will, or the union of the true and the good. Section 423. First, I need to say something about the union of intellect and will and its resemblance to the union of the good and the true, because this union does take place in the world of spirits. Each of us has an intellect and a will, the intellect being open to truths and formed from them, and the will being open to things that are good and formed from them. So whatever we understand and therefore think, we call true, and whatever we intend and therefore think, we call good. We are capable of thinking from our intellect, and thus observing what is true and also what is good, but we still do not think from our will unless we intend and do it. When we intend it and do it intentionally, then it is in both our intellect and our will, and therefore in us. This is because the intellect alone is not what makes a person, nor the will alone, but the intellect and the will together. This means that anything that is in both intellect and will is in us, and is therefore attributed to us. Whatever is only in the intellect is associated with us, but is not in us. It is only a matter of our memory, an item of information in our memory that we can think about when we are not in private, but are with other people. So it is something we can talk and argue about, and even something we can imitate with our affections and behavior. Section 424. Our ability to think from our intellect and not at the same time from our will is provided us so that we can be reformed. For we are reformed by means of truths, and truths, as already noted, are matters of intellect. We are actually born into total evil, as far as our wills are concerned, wishing well to no one but ourselves. If we wish well to ourselves alone, we are delighted when harm comes to others, especially when it is to our advantage. We actually want to channel everyone else's assets to ourselves, whether those assets are high rank or wealth, and are happy to the extent that we succeed. To correct and reform this kind of intent, we are given the ability to understand things that are true and to use them to control the evil urges that well up from our will. This is why we can think true things from our intellect and talk about them and do them even though we cannot think them from our will until we have changed in nature so that on our own, that is, from the heart, we intend them and do them. When we have this nature, then the things we think from our intellect are matters of our faith, and the things we think from our will are matters of our love. This means that faith and love are now united within us, just as intellect and will are. Section 425. To the extent that truths of the intellect are united to good things of the will, then, or to the extent that we intend and therefore do truths, we have heaven within us, because, as already noted, the union of the good and the true is heaven. However, to the extent that false elements of intellect are united to evil elements of will, we have hell within us, because the union of the false and the evil is hell. Still, to the extent that truths of intellect are not united to good elements of will, we are in the halfway state. Almost all of us nowadays are in a state in which we know things that are true and think about them on the basis of our information and also from our intellect. We act on either a lot of them or a few of them or none of them, or act contrary to them because of our love of evil and consequent trust in what is false. So in order that we may gain either heaven or hell after death, we are first taken to the world of spirits, where either the union of the good and the true takes place for people who are to be raised into heaven, or the union of the evil and the false for people who are to be cast into hell. This is because no one in heaven or in hell is allowed to have a divided mind, to understand one thing and intend something else. What we intend, we understand, and what we understand, we intend. Consequently, anyone in heaven who intends what is good understands what is true, and anyone in hell who intends what is evil understands what is false. So for good people, the false elements are taken away, and they are given truths suited and fitted to their virtue, while for evil people, truths are taken away, and they are given false elements suited and fitted to their vice. This enables us to see what the world of spirits is. Section 426. There is a vast number of people in the world of spirits, because that is where everyone is first gathered, where everyone is examined and prepared. There is no fixed limit to our stay there. Some people barely enter it and are promptly either taken up into heaven or cast down into hell. Some stay there for a few weeks, some for a number of years, though not more than 30. The variations in length of stay occur because of the correspondence or lack of correspondence between our deeper and our more outward natures. In the following pages, I will be explaining just how we are led from one state into another and prepared. Section 427. After we die, just as soon as we arrive in the world of spirits, we are carefully sorted out by the Lord. Evil people are immediately connected with the hellish community their ruling love had affiliated them with in the world, and good people are immediately connected with the heavenly community their love and thoughtfulness and faith had affiliated them with in the world. Even though we are sorted out in this way, we are still together in that world and can talk to anyone when we want to friends and acquaintances from our physical life, especially husbands and wives, and also brothers and sisters. I have seen a father talking with his 6 sons and recognizing them. I have seen many other people with their relatives and friends. However, since they were of different character because of their life in the world, they parted company after a little while. However, people who are coming into heaven from the world of spirits and people who are coming into hell do not see each other anymore. They do not even recognize each other unless they are of like character because of a likeness in love. The reason they see each other in the world of spirits but not in heaven or hell is that while they are in the world of spirits, they are brought into states like the ones they were in during their physical lives, one after another. After a while, though, they settle into a constant state that accords with their ruling love. In this state, mutual recognition comes only from similarity of love, for as we explained above, in sections 41 through 50, likeness unites and difference separates. Section 428. Just as the world of spirits is a state halfway between heaven and hell within us, it is a halfway place. The hells are underneath it, and the heavens above it. All the hells are closed on the side that faces that world, accessible only through holes and crevices like those in rocks and through broad gaps that are guarded to prevent anyone from coming out without permission, which happens in cases of real need, as will be discussed later. Heaven, too, is bounded on all sides, and the only access to any heavenly community is by a narrow way whose entry is also guarded. These exits and entrances are what are called the doors and gates of hell and heaven in the Word. Section 429. The world of spirits looks like a valley surrounded by mountains and cliffs, with dips and rises here and there. The doors and gates to heavenly communities are visible only to people who are being readied for heaven. No one else finds them. There is one entrance to each community from the world of spirits, with a single path beyond it. But as the path climbs, it divides into several. The doors and gates to the hells are visible only to the people who are going to enter them. They open for them, and once they are opened, you can see dark, sooty caves slanting downward into the depths, where there are still more gates. Rank, foul stenches breathe out from them, stenches that good spirits flee because they are repelled by them, while evil spirits are drawn toward them because they find them delightful. In fact, just as we find delight in our own evil in this world, we find delight after death in the stench that corresponds to our evil. We might compare this with the delight of carrion birds and beasts like crows and wolves and pigs, who fly or run toward rotting corpses as soon as they get wind of them. I heard one man who screamed aloud in utter torment at a breath of air from heaven, but was calm and happy when a breath from hell reached him. Section 430. There are two doors in each of us as well, one facing hell and open to evil and false things from hell, the other facing heaven and open to good and true things from heaven. The door of hell is open for people who are involved in what is evil and its consequent falsity, though just a little light from heaven flows in through the cracks, which enables us to think, reason, and talk. On the other hand, the door of heaven is open for people who are focused on what is good and therefore on what is true. There are actually two paths that lead to our rational mind, one from above or within, through which the good and the true enter from the Lord, and one from below or outside, through which the evil and the false infiltrate from hell. The rational mind itself is at the intersection of these two paths, so to the extent that light from heaven is let in, we are rational, but to the extent that it is not let in, we are not rational, even though we seem so to ourselves. I have mentioned these things so that our correspondence with heaven and with hell may be known. While our rational mind is in the process of being formed, it is responsive to the world of spirits. What is above it belongs to heaven, and what is beneath it belongs to hell. The higher things open, and the lower close against the inflow of evil and falsity for people who are being readied for heaven, while the lower things open and the higher close against the inflow of goodness and truth for people who are being readied for hell. As a result, these latter can only look downward toward hell, and the former can only look upward toward heaven. Looking upward is looking toward the Lord, because he is the common center that everything in heaven faces. Looking downward, though, is looking away from the Lord toward the opposite center, the center toward which everything in hell faces and gravitates. See above, sections 123 and 124. Section 431. In the preceding pages, where it said spirits, it meant people in the world of spirits, while angels meant people in heaven. Each of us is inwardly a spirit. Section 432. Anyone who thinks things through carefully can see that it is not the body that thinks, because the body is material. Rather, it is the soul, because the soul is spiritual. The human soul, whose immortality has been the topic of many authors, is our spirit. It is, in fact, immortal in all respects, and it is also what does the thinking in our bodies. This is because it is spiritual, and the spiritual is open to the spiritual and lives spiritually, through thought and intention. So all the rational life we can observe in our bodies belongs to the soul, and none of it to the body. Actually, the body is material, as just noted, and the matter that is proper to the body is an addendum and almost an attachment to the spirit. Its purpose is to enable our spirit to lead its life and perform its services in a natural world that is material in all respects and essentially lifeless. Since matter is not alive, only spirit, we may conclude that whatever is alive in us is our spirit, and that the body only serves it exactly the way a tool serves a live and activating force. We may, of course, say that a tool works or moves or strikes, but it is a mistake to believe that this is a property of the tool and not of the person who is wielding it. Section 433. Since everything that is alive in the body, everything that acts and feels because of life, belongs to the spirit alone, and none of it belongs to the body, it follows that the spirit is the actual person. In other words, we are essentially spirits, and have much the same form as well. You see, everything that is alive and sensitive within us belongs to our spirit, and there is nothing in us from head to toe that is not alive and sensitive. This is why, when our bodies are separated from our spirits, which is called dying, we still continue to be human and to be alive. I have heard from heaven that some people who die, while they are lying on the slab, before they have been revived, are still thinking in their cold bodies, and cannot help but feel that they are alive, but with the difference that they cannot move a single part of the matter that makes up their bodies. Section 434. We could not think or intend if there were no agent, no substance as the source and focal point of thought and intent. Anything we may imagine happening apart from a substantial agent is nothing. We can tell this from the fact that we could not see without an organ serving as the agent of our sight, or hear without an organ as the agent of our hearing. Apart from these, sight and hearing would be nothing, would not exist. The same holds true for thought, which is inner sight, and for attention, which is inner hearing. Unless these happened in and from agents that are organic forms, as subjects, they would not happen at all. We may gather from this that our spirit is also in a form, and that it is in human form, that it enjoys sensory organs and senses when it is separated from the body, just as it did when it was in it. We may gather that all of the eye's life, all of the ear's life, in fact, all of our sensory life belongs not to the body, but to the spirit that is in these functions, and even in their least details. This is why spirits see and hear and feel just as much as we do, though after we have left the body, this does not happen in the natural world, but in the spiritual one. The reason the spirit was sensitive on the natural level when it was in the body is that it worked through the material part that was appended to it. However, it was still spiritually sensitive in its thinking and intending. Section 435. I have presented this to convince rational people that, seen in our own right, we are spirits, and that the physical nature appended to us so that we can function in the natural and material world is not the real person, but only the tool of our spirit. But some supporting instances from experience would be better, because rational arguments are beyond many people, and the ones who have convinced themselves of opposite opinions make these arguments grounds for their skepticism by arguing on the basis of sensory illusions. People who have convinced themselves of an opposite opinion tend to think that animals live and sense just the way we do, so that they too have a spiritual nature like ours, yet this dies along with their bodies. However, the spiritual nature of animals is not the same as ours. We have an inmost nature that animals do not, a nature into which the divine flows and which it raises toward itself, in this way uniting us to itself. So we, unlike animals, can think about God and about divine matters of heaven and the church. We can love God because of these matters and by engaging with them, and can be so united to Him. And anything that can be united to the divine cannot be destroyed. Anything that cannot be united to the divine, though, does disintegrate. In section 39 above, I discuss this inmost that we have and animals do not. The reason for mentioning it again here is that it is important to dispel the illusions many people get from believing that animals are just like humans, people who cannot draw rational conclusions about these subjects because they lack information or because their intellect is not open. What I said there was as follows. I should like to disclose a particular secret about the angels of the three heavens that people have not been aware of until now because they have not understood the levels discussed in section 38. It is this, that within every angel and within every one of us here, there is a central or highest level, or a central and highest something where the Lord's divine life flows in first and most intimately. It is from this center that the Lord arranges the other relatively internal aspects within us that follow in sequence according to the levels of the overall design. This central or highest level can be called the Lord's gateway to angels, or to us, his essential dwelling within us. It is this central or highest level that makes us human and distinguishes us from the lower animals, since they do not have it. This is why we, unlike animals, can be raised up by the Lord toward himself, as far as all the deeper levels of our mind and character are concerned. This is why we can believe in him, be moved by love for him, and therefore see him. It is why we can receive intelligence and wisdom and talk rationally. It is also why we live forever. However, what is arranged and provided by the Lord at this center does not flow into the open perception of any angel, because it is higher than angelic thought and surpasses angelic wisdom. Section 436. A great deal of experience has taught me that we are spirits inwardly, experience that would fill whole volumes, as they say, if I were to include it all. I have talked with spirits as a spirit, and I have talked with them as a person in a body. When I have talked with them as a spirit, they could not tell that I was not a spirit myself, in just as human a form as theirs. That is how my inner nature looked to them, because when I talked with them as a spirit, they could not see my material body. Section 437. We may gather that inwardly we are spirits from the fact that after we depart from our bodies, which happens when we die, we are still alive and just as human as ever. To convince me of this, the Lord has allowed me to talk with almost all the people I had ever met during their physical lives, with some for a few hours, with some for weeks and months, and with some for years. This was primarily so that I could be convinced and could bear witness. Section 438. I may add here that even while we are living in our bodies, each one of us is in a community with spirits as to our own spirits, even though we are unaware of it. Good people are in angelic communities by means of their spirits, and evil people are in hellish communities. Further, we come into those same communities when we die. People who are coming into the company of spirits after death are often told and shown this. Actually, we are not visible as spirits in our spiritual communities while we are living in the world, because we are thinking on the natural level. However, if our thinking is withdrawn from the body, we are sometimes visible in our communities, because we are then in the spirit. When we are visible, it is easy to tell us from the spirits who live there, because we walk along deep in thought, silent, without looking at others, as though we did not see them. And the moment any spirit addresses us, we disappear. Section 439. To illustrate the fact that we are spirits inwardly, I should like to explain from experience what happens when we are taken out of the body and how we are led by the Spirit into another place. Section 440. The first experience, being taken out of the body, is like this. We are brought into a particular state that is halfway between sleep and waking. When we are in this state, it seems exactly as though we were awake. All our senses are as alert as they are when we are fully awake physically. Sight, hearing, and, strange to say, touch. These senses are more perfect than they can ever be during physical wakefulness. This is the state in which people have seen spirits and angels most vividly, even hearing them and, strange to say, touching them, with hardly anything physical interfering. It is the state described as being taken out of the body and not knowing whether one is in the body or outside it. I have been admitted to this state 3 or 4 times simply to let me know what it was like, and also to teach me that spirits and angels enjoy all the senses that we do too, as to our spirits, when we are taken out of the body. Section 441. As for the second kind of experience, being led by the Spirit into another place, I have been shown by first-hand experience what happens and how it happens, but only 2 or 3 times. I should like to cite just one experience. While I was walking through city streets and through the countryside, absorbed in conversation with spirits, it seemed exactly as though I were just as awake and observant as ever, walking without straying, though all the while I was in visions. I was seeing groves, rivers, mansions, houses, people, and more. After I had been walking for some hours, though, I suddenly found myself back in consciousness of my physical sight, and realized that I was somewhere else. I was utterly stunned by this, and realized that I had been in the state of people described as being led by the Spirit into another place. For as long as it lasted, I was not thinking about my route, even though it might have been many miles, or about the time, though it might have been many hours, or even days. I was not conscious of any fatigue either. This is how we can be led by ways we know nothing of all the way to some predetermined place, without straying. Section 442. These 2 states, though, which are states we have when we are awake to our deeper nature, or, which is the same thing, our spirit, are out of the ordinary. They were shown me simply to teach me what they were like, because they are known in the Church. But talking with spirits, being with them as one of them, this is something I have been granted when I was fully awake physically, and it has been going on now for years. Section 443. There is further support of our being spirits inwardly in the material presented in sections 311 through 317 above, where I discuss the fact that heaven and hell are from the human race. Section 444. Our being spirits inwardly has reference to our capacities for thinking and intending, because these are our actual inner natures. They are what make us human, and the quality of our humanity depends on their quality. Our revival from the dead and entry into eternal life. Section 445. When someone's body can no longer perform its functions in the natural world in response to the thoughts and affections of its spirit, which it derives from the spiritual world, then we say that the individual has died. This happens when the lungs' breathing and the heart's systolic motion have ceased. The person, though, has not died at all. We are only separated from the physical nature that was useful to us in the world. The essential person is actually still alive. I say that the essential person is still alive because we are not people because of our bodies, but because of our spirits. After all, it is the spirit within us that thinks, and thought and affection together make us the people we are. We can see, then, that when we die, we simply move from one world into another. This is why, in the inner meaning of the word, death means resurrection and a continuation of life. Section 446. The deepest communication of our spirit is with our breathing and our heartbeat. Thought connects with our breathing, and affection, an attribute of love, with our heart. Consequently, when these 2 motions in the body cease, there is an immediate separation. It is these 2 motions, the respiratory motion of the lungs and the systolic motion of the heart, that are essential ties. Once they are severed, the spirit is left to itself, and the body, being now without the life of its spirit, cools and decays. The reason the deepest communication of our spirit is with our breathing and our heart is that all our vital processes depend on these, not only in a general way, but in every specific. Section 447. After this separation, our spirit stays in the body briefly, but not after the complete stoppage of the heart, which varies depending on the cause of death. In some cases, the motion of the heart continues for quite a while, and in others it does not. The moment it does stop, we are awakened, but this is done by the Lord alone. Being awakened means having our spirit led out of our body and into the spiritual world, which is commonly called resurrection. The reason our spirit is not separated from our body until the motion of the heart has stopped is that the heart answers to affection, an attribute of love, which is our essential life, since all of us derive our vital warmth from love. Consequently, as long as this union lasts, there is a responsiveness, and therefore the life of the spirit is still in the body. Section 448. I have not only been told how the awakening happens, I have been shown by first-hand experience. The actual experience happened to me so that I could have a full knowledge of how it occurs. Section 449. I was brought into a state in which my physical senses were inoperative, very much then like the state of people who are dying. However, my deeper life and thought remained intact, so that I could perceive and retain what was happening to me, and what does happen to people who are being awakened from death. I noticed that my physical breathing was almost suspended, with a deeper breathing, a breathing of the spirit, continuing along with a very slight and silent physical one. At first, then, a connection was established between my heartbeat and the heavenly kingdom, because that kingdom corresponds to the human heart. I also saw angels from that kingdom, some at a distance, but 2 sitting close to my head. The effect was to take away all my own affection, but to leave me in possession of thought and perception. Section 449, subsection 2. I remained in this state for several hours. Then the spirits who were around me gradually drew away, thinking that I was dead. I sensed a sweet odor like that of an embalmed body, for when heavenly angels are present, anything having to do with a corpse smells sweet. When spirits sense this, they cannot come near. This is also how evil spirits are kept away from our spirit when we are being admitted into eternal life. The angels who were sitting beside my head were silent, simply sharing their thoughts with mine. When these are accepted by the deceased, the angels know that the person's spirit is ready to be led out of the body. They accomplish this sharing of thoughts by looking into my face. This is actually how thoughts are shared in heaven. Section 449, subsection 3. Since I had been left in possession of thought and perception so that I could learn and remember how awakening happens, I noticed that at first the angels were checking to see whether my thoughts were like those of dying individuals, who are normally thinking about eternal life. They wanted to keep my mind in these thoughts. I was later told that as the body is breathing its last, our spirit is kept in its final thought until eventually it comes back to the thoughts that flowed from our basic or ruling affection in the world. Especially, I was enabled to perceive and even to feel that there was a pull, a kind of drawing out of the deeper levels of my mind and therefore of my spirit from my body. And I was told that this was being done by the Lord and is what brings about our resurrection. Section 450. When heavenly angels are with people who have been awakened, they do not leave them, because they love everyone. But some spirits are simply unable to be in the company of heavenly angels very long and want them to leave. When this happens, angels from the Lord's spiritual kingdom arrive, through whom we are granted the use of light, since before this we could not see anything, but could only think. I was also shown how this is done. It seemed as though the angels rolled back a covering from my left eye toward the center of my nose, so that my eye was opened and able to see. To the spirit, it seems as though this were actually happening, but it is only apparently so. As this covering seemed to be rolled back, I could see a kind of clear but dim light, like the light we see through our eyelids when we are first waking up. It seemed to me as though this clear, dim light had a heavenly color to it, but I was later told that this varies. After that, it felt as though something were being rolled gently off my face, and once this was done, I had access to spiritual thought. This rolling something off the face is an appearance, for it represents the fact that we are moving from natural thinking to spiritual thinking. Angels take the greatest care to shield the awakening person from any concept that does not taste of love. Then they tell the individual that he or she is a spirit. After the spiritual angels have given us the use of light, they do everything for us as newly arrived spirits that we could ever wish in that state. They tell us, at least to the extent that we can grasp it, about the realities of the other life. However, if our nature is such that we do not want to be taught, then once we are awakened, we want to get out of the company of angels. Still, the angels do not leave us, but we do leave them. Angels really do love everyone. They want nothing more than to help people, to teach them, to lead them into heaven. This is their highest joy. When spirits leave the company of angels, they are welcomed by the good spirits who are accompanying them and who also do all they can for them. However, if they had led the kind of life in the world that makes it impossible for them to be in the company of good people, then they want to get away from these as well. This happens as long and as many times as necessary until they find the company of people their earthly life has fitted them for. Here they find their life, and remarkable as it may sound, they then lead the same kind of life they had led in the world. Section 451. This first stage of our life after death does not last more than a few days, though. In the following pages I will be describing how we are then brought from one state into another until finally we arrive either in heaven or in hell. This, too, is something I have been allowed to learn from a great deal of experience. Section 452. I have talked with some people on the third day after their death, when the events described in sections 449 and 450 have been completed. I talked with 3 whom I had known in the world, and told them that their funeral services were now being planned so that their bodies could be buried. When they heard me say that it was so that they could be buried, they were struck with a kind of bewilderment. They said that they were alive, and that people were burying what had been useful to them in the world. Later on, they were utterly amazed at the fact that while they had been living in their bodies, they had not believed in this kind of life after death, and particularly that this was the case for almost everyone in the church. Some people, during their earthly lives, have not believed in any life of the soul after the life of the body. When they discover that they are alive, they are profoundly embarrassed. However, people who have convinced themselves of this join up with others of like mind and move away from people who have lived in faith. Most of them link up with some hellish community because such people reject the divine and have no use for truths of the church. In fact, to the extent that we convince ourselves in our opposition to the ideal of the eternal life of the soul, we also convince ourselves in opposition to the realities of heaven and the church.